Okay, so let's go to wide receiver. I know we got quite a few guys to talk about this position, and really, I mean, it is just totally up in the air as far as who's going to be the most impactful receivers on this team. I think the only clear guy that we know is going to have a role, really, is Monterey Baldwin. I think everyone else is kind of like, he could be that, but we don't know for sure.
Yeah, I mean, and I think part of it is because he doesn't have anybody else on the roster who can really do what he does. I think Cam Bonner is close, but even Cam is more of a deep threat, or more of a pure deep threat than I think what makes Monterey so special is just that he's great on jet sweeps. He's great on the intermediate stuff in that he's a better route runner than you think. And then he has, 4.40 speed to go over the top. I mean, that's just kind of a rare combination. So I think his role is relatively solidified. And then I think just so that we don't forget anybody, why don't we just kind of run through each guy one by one? So who do you want to talk about next?
Yeah. Well, I guess let's just go oldest to youngest. Okay. So how about Gavin Holmes? Problem with Gavin for me is that Monterey is starting over him. Exactly. And Monterey needs to be on the field over Gavin. I like Gavin situationally, but I don't want him taking reps away from Monterey.
That's I basically feel the same way. I think Gavin pre-injury was an interesting piece. He was a very kind of linear, explosive athlete, not somebody that I would describe as like as fluid as somebody as Monterey Baldwin. And I do think the injuries have taken a slight toll on him. I think he still remains tough and he has good hands, but he doesn't bring the same level of overall athleticism as somebody like a Monterey Baldwin or even like a Seth Jones. I think what we saw in the spring game is that Gavin mostly played on clear passing downs when they played with 4 and 5 wide, and he would play as an inside receiver. Yeah. I think if he's going to find a role this year, that's probably what it's going to be.
I agree 100%. The next guy up, and man, this is probably one of the biggest wild cards, and it's Jalen Ellis.
Yeah.
And Jalen, I mean, coming out of high school, the dude, I mean, his film in high school is phenomenal. Like, the guy was ridiculous, got hurt in the All-American game, and just has been hurt his entire career at Baylor. That's kind of been the story.
Yeah, I mean, his film out of high school was like literally 7 straight minutes of him just catching like 50-yard touchdown passes. His speed is just out of this world. His acceleration is great, and he has good wide receiver skills, and he knows how to track the ball, and he knows how to complete the catch at the catch point. But as you said, it's just been injuries. And the problem for him is that if he wants to play as an outside receiver in this offense, you need to have reliable hands, and you have to be a good route runner, because if you drop the ball on a slant on 2nd and 8, like, you're just not going to play in this offense. Yeah. And I'm not saying that he's known as a guy who drops the ball. I don't know that. I'm just saying that from his high school tape, we don't have any evidence of him really doing that. We just know that he takes the lid off. Monterey is going to be that inside guy who's taking the lid off, and I don't think Jalen's going to play over him. So it's a very clear question of, can Jalen become an all-around receiver? And that's just pure speculation from you and I. I mean, you and I have talked to people that have watched him at practice, but the problem is that nobody has really watched him at practice so much because he's been hurt for so long.
He was hurt all spring.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think it's just pure speculation. I think it's very clear. If he becomes a complete wide receiver to where he can be money on slants, he can hit the comeback routes, we know that speed will play at an elite level.
Yeah, the only glimpses we have was last spring when he was utterly dominant before he got hurt, like was scoring touchdowns in spring, and it was crazy. It was like, oh my gosh, this guy with Gary or Jacob is going to put up a bunch of points, got hurt, didn't play. The other glimpse we have was the OU game a few years ago where he mossed the dude down the sideline. Everyone's like, oh my, there's a glimpse.
Yeah.
But that's all we have with Jalen Ellis right now. Moving on to the sophomores, let's go with Seth Jones up next. He started the spring game, obviously, and there's some potential there.
Yeah, I mean, I really liked him out of high school. I actually, you win some, you lose some, and there's still time for him to prove me right. But out of high school, I compared him to Tylan Wallace, the Oklahoma State wide receiver, in that both of them are like 5'11", but just play really big. Like, they know how to make contested catches on the sideline. They have good speed, and they profile as all-around receivers, even though they're smaller. Seth is just a guy that, by all accounts, it's just been like an adjustment to college type thing. It's been being reliable day in, day out. Everybody in this receiver room is uber talented. You can't get by on just talent alone. You have to hone everything about your game. But as you said, he's only a sophomore, right? Redshirt sophomore. So, yeah, he's a third-year guy, plenty of time, and he started in the spring game. The exact role for him this year, I think he's a guy that if in games when Baylor plays with more 3 wide receivers on the field, he's a guy that can operate as that third wide receiver. or if he outplays somebody like Monterey, which he has the athletic ability to do, he could start in those 2 wide receiver sets. But I expect him this year to be more of a 3rd and 4th option. But that's a lot more than I thought prior to the spring game. I'd kind of forgotten about him. Wasn't really thinking about him much. But now at this point, I expect him to be one of the top 4 wide receivers on the team.
I don't have quite that high expectations. I have a couple guys that we'll get to who I think will actually take over that role at some point. I do like Seth. I actually always thought he was going to end up being a defensive back at some point. I know A&M offered him at DB, and he's still a good player, and I was surprised he started, and he did show glimpses. So there's definitely an opportunity there that he has to go out and seize in fall camp, because I think every position is up for grabs right now at wide receiver. We talked about Monterey already. I don't think we need to go over him. Let's go with Josh Cameron, though. A guy who got a scholarship now. He's on scholarship, had a great spring, probably the best spring of any of these wide receivers because he wasn't hurt. Everyone else got hurt. So Josh Cameron on scholarship, great contested catch guy, and a great red zone threat as well.
Great route runner. Great hands. He has really long arms, massive wingspan. He was a guy that ran like a 5.1 40 at a combine in high school. And so basically every school just didn't even bother to look at him again. But he was injured at the time. And he looks now like I've seen a couple of videos of him running this spring where you can kind of get a 40 time on him thereabouts. And he looks like he's about a 4.65, 4.7 guy. And at 6'2", 215, that's perfectly fine. I mean, obviously you would prefer a guy who's like 4.55 or so, like Armani Winfield is, or a Hal Presley is probably in that range also. But Josh brings a lot to the table in that, positions, the distinction between wide receiver and tight end in modern college football is just being blurred further and further. And I think something that you could really see interesting with Josh this year, that even though he's kind of playing that Tyquan Thornton outside receiver role, is you can get in some situations where he kind of functions as a pseudo H-back. Baylor asked their wide receivers to crack back and block a lot, and he's a guy who very clearly profiles to be good at that, especially as they want to get the ball out on the edges. You need the wide receivers to kind of control those defensive backs. So I think he profiles well there. And I think, honestly, at this point, it's between him and Armani Winfield and Hal Presley and maybe Javon Gibson for being that starting wide receiver game 1.
Yeah, I think that's about right on the outside. But you could start both, obviously, and have Monterey as the slot guy. Next up, you mentioned him, Hal Presley. I love Hal.
How could you not?
Yeah, I think Hal has such a high ceiling. I hate that he got hurt, and I hate the kind of injury that he had because it's one of those that you just never know how long it takes to recover from that.
Which is he broke his foot.
Right. He broke his foot, so you're kind of like, what's going to happen there? Going into the year, I did expect him to be the starter on the outside. I still think there's a chance he gets there, but there is also a chance that I have in my mind that he doesn't start out as the starter, and then he works his way into being the guy on the outside.
I think if I had to make a prediction, that would be my guess, is that by the end of the year, he's Baylor's top outside wide receiver target. I mean, it was between him and Tate Williams for being my highest rated recruit in last year's class. And, I think his upside is very high. I don't think he's ever going to be like a top 3 round pick in the NFL, just because I don't think his speed is quite there. But I think that's kind of beside the point, because the reason why I had him rated so highly is because his game, which is being like a 6'2", tall, lanky wide receiver who can just dominate people down the field because he's so good at the catch point, and he's big and tough to where he can do all the kind of underneath and intermediate stuff too, is like, I just think he's basically a guarantee that by the time he leaves Baylor, he's a first team all Big 12 wide receiver. And in a league with a lot of wide receiver talent, that's pretty spectacular. I hope he proves me wrong on the NFL draft point. I think he probably just needs to get a little bit faster, but he's a 4.55 guy, I think, thereabouts, and that's plenty fast to dominate at the college level.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. I think Hal is very high ceiling by the time he leaves Baylor. Next up here, let's go with Elijah Bean. Kind of a forgotten member of the group a little bit. No one really talks about him. Big, long frame, not the fastest, does not have elite speed, and his hands are a bit of a question mark as well, but a great frame and a guy that I still think is in the developmental mode right now.
Yeah, he was a really interesting prospect because he ran, I think as like a 13 or 14-year-old, he was like the fastest 400-meter runner in all of the United States. And he still is really fast for his size. I mean, like you said, he's like 6'5".
He's a 4'8" guy.
Yeah. Oh, is he really? Mm-hmm. Okay. So
out of high school. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Not as fast as I thought he was then. I mean, he looks good at 6'5". I think the question mark for me is like, does he have the feel for the position? Can he become a great route runner? Can he have reliable hands? If not, then he probably needs to become a defensive back or play linebacker or something like that. But I think, it was very clear what he was when he was a take, which was, if he develops these other skills, he's got great athleticism and he's got great size and it'll work out. But he was a developmental project, so it's not a surprise for me that as a second and third year guy, he's not there yet.
Yeah, and I think his path to being successful needs to go in the path of Josh Cameron. I think that's the route he needs to take if he wants to be a contributor at Baylor. Next up, Cameron Bonner. We saw a big touchdown from him in the spring game. He got loose. I know he's excited about special teams. I know that he's excited about his role there, and we saw all spring he's a starter on special teams. But then at the wide receiver position, we finally got to see glimpses of him with his speed taking the top off the defense.
I mean, that was really cool. He was the one that caught the pass from C.J. Rogers.
Yep.
And he had a couple of sweeps that he looked good on too, which surprised me because I thought he was more of a linear athlete out of high school, but he looked pretty like he had good bend,
fluid.
So yeah, I think it's pretty clear where like he's probably the prime. I mean, depending on how you define Seth Jones and maybe a Gavin Holmes, I think Cam is probably that primary backup to the role that Monterey Baldwin plays. And Cam's only a second-year guy. I guess he's, Monterey's also a second-year guy, so that creates a bit of a butting head situation there. But it's a situation to where, even though I think Monterey Baldwin is probably Baylor's best overall wide receiver, I wouldn't be doom and gloom if he were hurt for a long time because I think Cam does a lot of what Monterey does and does it pretty well. I'm pretty excited about Cam.
Yeah, there's another guy that we're going to talk about that I think might have something to say about that. We'll get to him in a second, but I do agree with what you're saying about Cameron Bonner.
I don't even know who you're talking about, so I'm excited.
We'll get to him. Okay. Next up, Javon Gibson, another guy shown flashes, young, very young. I still think he's a developmental guy who could see some playing time this year. Love his speed, love his upside, and he has grown. Like, his body looks so much better.
He was young out of high school.
Young.
Yeah. I mean, his question is hands. Mm-hmm. Taekwon became very reliable despite having the world's smallest hands for a wide receiver. I don't know Gibson's hand size, but I think they're also like pretty small like Taekwon's. And that's just the thing. Like, Gibson has it all. He just needs to become a reliable receiver. He looked good in the spring game, and like physically, he just ran a route one time, and I kind of did like a double take. I was like, who was that? I mean, he just looked amazing. But then he like double clutched one pass, had another couple good receptions, and I think it's very clear for me, like, if he ever becomes a reliable hands guy, he's probably the most talented overall wide receiver on the. I mean, it's tough to say that on this team, but I think if he develops good hands, he's up there for being the best athlete, like functionally overall as a wide receiver on the team. So that's the clear path for him.
Yeah, definitely. I actually think the next guy is probably the most well-rounded receiver of all the guys as far as his ceiling and kind of how I view his development going. And for me, that's Armani Winfield. We saw flashes this spring, and he's a great route runner, but he also has very good speed as well. Like, he's an underrated athlete who can really run routes, and I like what he's going to bring to the table. He'll be a top 3 wide receiver in my eyes on this team, for sure top 4, and I think he's going to get the targets necessary to get there.
Yeah, and what I liked about him out of high school is he's an elite route runner. As you said, he has better speed than I don't know what most people think his speed is, but I think he's probably about a 4.55 guy, which is at 6'2", 195 or whatever, is pretty good. But his route running ability is just like out of this world. And the reason why I liked him this year is because I think, like how Shapen is going to use Ben Sims on these kind of clear, gotta have it situations, I think Armani is a clear situation where, it's 3rd and 9, and so you're splitting out 4 or 5 wide receivers, and you put Armani up against a safety from inside, and you just say, go win. And I think he's a great target to do so. And I definitely think it's between him, Josh Cameron, and Hal Presley for being the starting, out wide guy this year. And he has all the potential in the world to do it. I mean, just when you see him in practice videos, when you see him in the spring game, like just the way he moves, you're just like, this guy has it.
Yeah.
It's good.
I think he's just a clear upgrade over RJ Sneed.
Oh,
that's how I view him scheming kind of like RJ, but just way better. So getting way more opportunities.
Yeah, and that's
on the field.
what I just described, that kind of like gotta have it situation, because RJ had such great hands that they did use him in that situation last year.
Right.
And so I think they could definitely fulfill a similar role. And I'm with you. I'd rather have Armani than RJ.
Big time. And then the final one, and this is one I'm really excited about. That's Jordan Neighbors.
Oh, Jordan. How did I forget about him? Okay,
Just
there you go.
Enrolled. I am so intrigued by him as a prospect because the speed is out of this world. He's young, very young for his grade, and the production is there as well, even though he was a second option on his high school team. He's special, and I think he's going to fight his way on the field year one.
Yeah, I mean, I honestly just forgot about him. All right, kick Cam Bonner off the team. You don't need him. I'm just kidding. But yeah, I mean, I don't know how you could. Jordan is as good as it comes athletically. He plays big. He's like Corey Coleman. Like sometimes it's just like, I bet if you did a poll on Sic'Em 365 or just like did a blind poll, like who does this player remind you of? I bet 99% of 365 members would have said Corey Coleman. It's not a difficult comparison. They're big guy, or excuse me, they're 5'11" guys who play just tough, physical, explosive, amazing deep speed, amazing acceleration. So the question for me is just like, how quickly does he pick up the offense? How quickly does he become reliable against knowing what to do against certain coverages, like sitting down in zone versus, what you do versus man, all that kind of stuff. Because as soon as he figures that out, he's one of the 3 or 4 best wide receivers on the team. So we just said that about a lot of guys. If you figure that, Tay and Squirrel and Ben Sims and Drake Dabney are all going to receive a significant amount. Maybe not Squirrel as far as reception targets. So maybe one of the running backs, the 2 tight ends, you figure are probably going to be top 6 on the team in receptions, right? And 6 guys is usually about how many people get like the lion's share of targets. Yeah. So that's 3. If you had to kind of pick your other 3 for who gets the most receptions this fall, what would you think?
Monterey is for sure one of them. So Monterey's on that group. I don't know that they're going to check down as much to the running back. I don't know that Shapen's going to do that as much. So I think you might.
They design a lot. They design a lot of passes for the running back.
They do. I just wonder. He's a gunslinger, man. Like I just think we're going to see. Like Tyquan had 62 receptions last year. I think if he was on this year's team, he'd have like 90 or 100. You know what I mean? Like just so different the way that I think they're going to scheme things and allow Shapen to take shots. I think my other 2 would probably be by the end of the year. I mean, it's hard to bet against Josh Cameron because he's healthy and has played, so I guess he's got to be on there. And then I'd probably go with Armani just because I do think it could take Hal Presley a minute to get up to the point where he is the unquestioned best receiver. But I do think by the end of the year, it might be him. So, again, it's just a cluster, man. But those 3 would be my best bets.
I think I'm with you there. Armani, Monterey, and then Josh Cameron to start out the year, and then maybe he holds off Hal Presley. And if he holds off Hal, that just tells you that Josh is killing it. Yeah. And then maybe it's Hal at the end of the year. So I think I'm with you there.
Yeah, so that's kind of how I see it. I do think there'll be more targets to go around. You're not going to see RJ 46 catches, Tyquan 62. It's just they're going to throw it more. Drew had 30. So that's kind of how we see the wide receivers.